Hello and welcome to part two of Author a la carte with our writer and artist and poet, Moss. Moss, could you please give us a bit of an introduction about yourself?
All right. Thanks for having me. I
Thank you for
am
coming.
a I am a dilettante. I do a dabble in this and a dabble in that, and I enjoy very much the experience of art as a frontier, which means to me that the unknown territory is where I want to go with art and to grasp something from beyond and bring it into this world that we share.
That's wonderful. And I have mixed up my question lists. Yay! So tell us about where you're from and when you first discovered poetry.
Okay, I live in Ontario in Canada, and I first discovered poetry because I had a friend who was really into writing poems, and she would take these books, these little um, kind of folders with three rings in them, like not a binder, but like a duotang, I think they're called. And she would take magazine clippings and cover a collage over the entire cover of these little journal books that she would put together. And I thought that was the
Mhm.
coolest thing. And so I started to write poetry with her, and we would just flip through the dictionary and kind of look up silly words that didn't sound so obvious and figure out what they meant and then use them in our poems.
And how old were you when that process began?
Oh, I must have been about 12 or 13.
Wow, wonderful. Um, and if you don't mind me asking, how old are you now?
Oh, I'm in my 30s now.
Okay. And how many books have you written or designed?
So far, I've had two that I've self published. One is called Moss, a love poetry mashup compilation, and the other one is called Madness Poetry and Crazy Art.
All right. And I apparently got a little flustered during the chair debacle, um, and started interviewing you before the segment. And or the point is, and some poetry from her book Madness. Where did it go? Titles.
Madness Poetry and Crazy Art.
Yes. Madness Poetry and Crazy Art, Moss. And could you read us some of your poems, please?
Okay, I can do that. Um, I guess I start the book with a little trigger warning because some of the content is about mental health and substance use and some intense experiences. And so I just like people to know that they should be safe if they have a trigger, that they should be doing self care or talking to someone about it, and just following whatever plan they might have for themselves. It's not that intense, but just in case, it's always good to be on the safe side. So I guess one of the ones that I really liked that I had written in here, I'm kind of flipping through one of my paper copies and looking for it specifically. Um, it's peak experience. And I found it. Okay. So, peak experience, I'll just read it first. And then maybe if you want me to talk about it after, I'll go into that. Does it sound okay?
Absolutely.
All right. So, I've written this one February 13th of 2015. I miss the colors and the lights, the way the fractals crawled, laughs lasting entire nights, the angst with which I bawled. I miss the textures, miss the breath, the missions and the awe, the rebirths that were ego death, the introspection raw. I miss the synchronicity, how mundane troubles ceased. But most of all, apparently, I miss the inner peace. That one's peak experience.
Mm. Yes.
So I feel that this one kind of speaks to the experiences of those elevated states that we can get into as human beings. And it's kind of about the way that sometimes when that elevated state goes away, there's this longing to revisit it. And that can show up in different ways through the different ways that we access those states. Some people, it may be through trance consciousness, through drumming or dancing or like that kind of a thing, or it could be through substance use for some people, or it could be through like a manic episode if they have elevated biochemical states, or it could be a lot of different ways. And so it's about the brilliance of those moments for some people. It's not always a terrible bad thing to be in a mad place. Absolutely, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And could you please read us some more?
Absolutely. It's kind of a trip through memory lane because I've been working on a new book, so it's like looking at what I've put together here is kind of almost like a little visit to the past. So I'm glad that we're here doing this. It's kind of cool.
Absolutely. And we will want to have you back when you have your new book out.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so this one is called Stigma's Cross. It's a little bit farther along in the book, and I read it October 5th of 2015. Oppression has a face that looks like you and I. It casts a fog of glamour over people like a dye. Anyone it touches bears the cross of stigma's lie. Oppression is the crushing weight that keeps us from the sky. Pity parties, scare tactics, misinformation, crime. The world is ignorant to why the underprivileged line the streets, the wards, the offices of the middle class who climb the corporate ladders built upon the misfortunes of our time. But you can get a handout or else get a hand up. You have to trust in your potential, not your foolish luck. The ones who make your problems last are out to make a buck. But some do care. Some see the strength inside beyond the rut. They say you can't be helpful to those who don't help themselves. That's just an old wives' tale meant to keep hope on the shelves. In my day, we reached out and did good deeds like little elves. I never snicker at the chance to crank compassion's valves. Don't be complacent in your life. Possibility is vast. Time can go slow when you're down or fly very fast. But there's always opportunity to smash the ceiling's glass. You're a person first. Remember that. You are the greener grass. That one's Stigma's Cross. I guess what I'll share about that one is that I've done some work in the mental health system as a support person for folks who are struggling. And through that work, I got to see both sides of the equation, the client side and the clinician side, and just seeing the different realities that exist for those folks on either side of the equation. As someone who's kind of in this liminal space in between, you get to see that just like in any industry, there's the people who are there because they're really passionate, and then there's the people there who don't really grasp that passion the same way. And it's kind of just like oppression seeps in to whatever you're doing, and you can either participate in that because you're not aware, or you can find a way to get around it and to help people up out of that. So that's kind of the place that I came from when I was writing that one.
I noticed that in the poem you said, "In my day, we helped each other." Do you think your day has passed?
That was a kind of a call out to a time when I was a child, I was in the Girl Guides movement. I was in this girls group that did kind of good deeds as part of our participation and membership in the group. So when I said we did good deeds like little elves, it was like a shout out to that time in my life where we kind of we're good little helpers. And I don't think that's a part that's over. It's just that's kind of where I came from.
That's wonderful. Could you I'm assuming that not everybody will have the opportunity to print out your PDF. So could you perhaps look at one of your drawings and verbally tell us about it and what its meaning to you is?
Okay, sure. Let's see. Where's one that I can speak to in that way?
And let us know what
Okay.
page number.
Um, I believe in my book it's on page 33 on my paper copy. I'm assuming the PDF would be the same, but it might be a page or two off. It's sitting across from the poem called Smokin' Hot, and it's got these two birds in it, and it's kind of a naturey psychedelic scene. If you guys can find that one. So it's basically when I was drawing this, I was sitting in a conference, a youth conference. I was in my late 20s and doing some work with transitional aged youth who have like emotional and behavioral challenges or things going on in their life that are hard to deal with. And so I was sitting in this conference learning more about how to be involved in youth engagement and how to be a person who is both a youthful person still in that emerging adulthood range, able to become a successful adult, but also in a helping role, how to promote that good life. And so the workshop was put on by some First Nations folks who were telling stories. And I was just drawing in my journal because I have this ability to pay better a concentration if I am also moving my hands. And I respect the oral tradition and I don't want to write down what I'm hearing because I think it's more important to hear it and to be able to repeat it. So what I did was I just drew this picture. And so it kind of became a sort of a psychedelic nature scene because a lot of what I do is psychedelic art. And so when I'm hearing a story and I hear a little piece of that story, I can represent some of it and then carry on into what is in that frontier that I spoke to earlier, that unknown territory, that piece of something else, something just beyond, and reach out through the veil into that place and pull back something that might be there that can be revealed to me.
That's fantastic. So, in your case, rather like mine actually, when you draw, um, drawing is almost like sewing in memory onto the paper.
That's a great way of looking at it. I never thought of it quite that way, but it can be. It's a craft, definitely, just like any other kind of design. And I think that it can be a way of remembering things, like memorizing or putting to the future what you take from the past. But I think also it's a unfolding process. It's kind of almost like a philosophical kind of dialectic that you're having with the other world. You present something and then something responds to you and you represent that and then you keep going. So it's both, I guess. It's about being present in the moment and representing the past to the future.
All right, and continuing on with our interview, um, what would you say are, um, or what rather, would you say are your sources of inspiration? Um, Maybe in pop culture, spirituality,
Wow,
things that
what a big question. My sources of inspiration.
your influences.
Um, I think that everything that has touched my life has been an influence to me. So it's hard to pin down exactly who or what or where or when or why or any of those things would be a direct influence on me. However, I can definitely say that spirituality has been a big influence on me. I did study in university world religions and philosophy. And I really enjoyed that time. And I found that I was going to the library for books that were not in my courses a lot. And so I kind of dipped into a little of this and a little of that because I'm a dilettante and I dabble here and I dabble there. And I felt that I really connected to a lot of different spiritualities and became kind of a pluralist in regards to what I think is valuable in spirituality, because I think everybody has a piece of the truth. I'd also say that I tend to avoid pop culture a little bit. Like I don't go out to the movies very often. I don't listen to the radio all the time. That's probably because I don't drive a car, so I don't just automatically turn on the radio. But I do think that the subcultures are very important and very influential. So anytime I can take a look at a subculture like goth or psytrance or punk or indie or whatever is going on that's new and trendy. I like to kind of take a look and get the feel for what the music is like, what the food is like, what the lore is like, what people are talking about, what their politics are, and to kind of dip into what that is, that whole experience. And then from that, I can draw out a few poems or a few thoughts or a few experiences to write down.
All right, so to narrow my question a bit, can you talk about some of the goth and punk and spiritual influences that went into this book?
Okay. Okay. So there's I guess some of the goth elements of the book would be some of the like the more graveyardy, Halloweeny kind of images. Like I know I've doodled some ghosts here and there, and there's one image of a mummy with a briefcase that I did. Actually, I did that one for a challenge called Drawloween. It was one of the first days in the month. I didn't get very far in that challenge. I just kind of took it for inspiration and then thought, well, no, not for me. But it was fun, and I would have continued had it been something that I had the time for, probably. But as for what influenced from goth, I think mostly the decadence of goth is kind of intriguing to me. Like that idea that the world is kind of decaying and going into this state of madness or illness or something that's not good, and that there's beauty in that, that there's something powerful in that, because not only is there that sense of things going to become composted or rotten or apocalyptic, which can be scary and horrific. There's also this energy about it that there's sort of an aesthetic to that, and the aesthetic is sort of beautiful, like just the way it kind of fits in this model of what reality can be like if you're looking through that lens. And I kind of connect with that a little bit because um, part of me has been obsessed with death and dying, and part of me has been obsessed with the apocalypse and whether that's going to happen, and the destruction of the environment and how important that is to prevent, but it's still happening. And so all of that kind of goes into my thought processes and kind of molds itself into a picture of what goth is about in that level. And then when I draw something like a ghost, it kind of represents some of that. In terms of psytrance culture, I would say that I guess the psychedelic nature of the art in general is based on some of the repetitive trance music rhythms, um, kind of coming out as shapes that repeat themselves on the page, or a lot of the art in psychedelic trance culture actually is really vivid blacklight art, and a lot of shapes that are geometrically like sacred geometry in them, or kind of just the shadowing effects of them are kind of interesting. And it creates a psychedelic experience whether you're listening to the music or not, whether you're experiencing a psychedelic substance or not. And you, just looking at the image kind of represents this sort of altered state. And so I tried to represent some of that in my art by doing some kaleidoscopic kind of images, with taking sections of the art and then just mirroring it around, or making kind of just edits to it to make it more psychedelic than it actually originally even was. And then I just thought like if I represent that side of myself in a positive way, that kind of speaks to a bit of the harm reduction work that I've done in terms of like if people are going to be psychonauts and going to explore their internal lives and going to expand their minds, how can they do that in a way that honors themselves and is safe and is spiritual or whatever it is that they need to do to be doing that in a good, healthy way. And so that's kind of what that represents in my art. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. So my next question would be, what drew you to the topic? What in your life drew you to the topic of mental health? What inspired that journey?
Well, I had my own experiences of madness, of going through that journey as a person who was overcome by an illness, which I now reframe as a spiritual emergency. It was kind of a spiritual crisis rather than a mental, completely only mental crisis for me. And so, looking back on what actually had happened and what I was going through, I see it as a very spiritual thing. But at the time of writing, I was deep in my work as a mental health support worker. And so I kind of framed it in more of a like, how can I turn this illness into something else? And like before that whole shift had happened in my mind to spirituality, it was kind of like, oh, madness. Madness is about, it's not about being sick or being something wrong with me. It's more about that things are kind of different than what they were before. And it's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland or a little bit like Orwell. And it's kind of just like this, there's something that's different and it's not quite right, but it's something I can work with.
Absolutely.
um yeah, I think that kind of answers that a bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so, um, how long did writing this book take?
I don't think the pages are in chronological order. So I made the book in 2017. I've noticed that a lot of them were written in 2014 and 2015. So I assume it took a few years for me to write them all. Well, there's one from 2013 as well. So maybe over the course of 5 or 6 years, I'm guessing, because that would be probably when I started doing recovery work seriously and started to really think about my experiences and being able to give voice to my experiences in poetry, which not a lot of people can actually find comfort in doing because it's hard to express that whole side of life. Sometimes it's there's shame, there's guilt, there's stigma, big time stigma and oppression and all the things that go with it that are negative. So for me to actually find my voice and be able to put onto words what I had been through, it must have taken a few years for me to actually be able to go from the process of taking the first step of journaling and then maybe posting some of them to friends and then actually the process of putting the book together, like slapping the images on pages with poems beside them, that actually only took like a weekend. I just decided on the spur of a moment, I was like, I have enough poems to make a book, why don't I make a book? And so I was like, hey, this is fun. And I just spent the entire weekend doing that, and then that was that.
Okay. So it's poetry can be a very different process than writing a novel.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I've tried writing a novel before. Yeah, it's totally a different process.
So, and on that note, do you have any other coloring books and poetry books planned?
I do have. Right now, I'm working on one about the summer solstice that I had recently. I went camping for a bit with some friends and we had a really good time. And I had some very spiritual experiences and some fun and some just random nature time. And I just enjoyed it so much that I wrote such a large amount of poetry about it that I thought, why don't I make another book about this? But I haven't really decided whether I'm going to make it into prose or leave it in poetry. I'm kind of in that stage right now with it, but it's upcoming and it'll be soon.
That's fantastic. And my last question is, how has the Second Life community helped you become a better poet and artist?
You know what? Second Life is actually really an amazing place to be creative. It is so inspiring to just talk to other people who are being creative, to build with other people who are building, to write with other people who are writing, to just create in general with people who appreciate that. And it's such a receptive place for any kind of creating. It's a co-created world in the most real sense. And so I think that my experiences through like writing events at Milkwood or different talks that happen around like about spirituality or meditation or like just different sims offer different things, and it's really worth exploring what's out there and
And
going
feel
through the
free to
process of
mention
finding it.
specific Sims.
Oh, there's just such a big list. If I started listing them, I would forget somebody and then they would be offended. But definitely, I guess in my profile pics, you could find some of the ones that have been very inspiring for me if you'd like to look there.
All right. So my discussion tracker is turned on. And if we have any questions or comments from the audience, could you please type a Q or a C?
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry. My voice wasn't on.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So, whoops. Hello. So, yes, my discussion tracker is on, and if anyone from the audience has a question or a comment, if you could please type a Q or a C, we could take some more questions for the author, for the poet. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's a great idea.
Do we have any questions or comments from the audience? It was great to have you, Kiki. You didn't get the link to work. Moss, can you please post the link to your PDF?
There you go. Just make sure those spaces are if you're writing it in a browser, it's not a space. It's actually, it says %20. Like %20 is the code for a space in URL talk.
Yes, what I do is I copy and paste it into my browser.
Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate all the feedback.
And thank you so much for coming. And
What a pleasure.
I guess we answered the questions very thoroughly.
I guess so. Yeah, it's like so nice to be invited. So thank you so much.
And I would love to have you both back in the future. Thank you everyone for coming. I hope you enjoyed. Yes, thank you for having me. This idea was spearheaded by Harriet Guzman, the owner of Milkwood Writers Colony. Yes, absolutely. And I have sort of chopped everything into clips, but I will have these up on YouTube as soon as I can. Please forgive me that occasionally things show up on the screen, and I would close things out and forget, or I'd remember that I was recording and close things out as quickly as possible. So, but yeah, that will be hopefully be up in on YouTube in the next hour, if the file if the files aren't too big. I've never done this before. Thank you so much, everyone. And join us in 2 weeks for our next author a la carte on August 22nd at 6 p.m. at Amatsushima, where we will be interviewing Robert Watterson and Rain Baudet at 6 p.m.